Welcome from the digital studios of the Cape Town Conversations. My name is Julia de Clerck-Sachsse, and I work with the German Marshall Fund of the United States. We're here today to discuss some new formats in global governance, and in particular whether multilateral or minilateral formats are more effectively in addressing some of the world's most pressing challenges. I'm thrilled to be joined here with my two wonderful panelists, Pamla Gopaul from the African Union Development Agency, and Davis Makori, a Rotary Peace Fellow. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Pamla, if you don't mind, I'll start with you. So some of the latest discussions are that as multilateralism is in a sort of crisis, as our world is becoming ever more conflictual, it's a more nimble and more effective way to turn to minilateral formats. At the same time, some of our global challenges do need global solutions. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit, in your experience, which of these approaches are actually more effective in addressing the challenges that we are facing today?
Great, thank you, Julia. And I am Pamela Gopaul again, the lead coordinator of the Economic Analysis and Foresight Unit at the African Union Development Agency. And thank you, Julia. I think it's important in this persistence of complex challenges that we face globally today. It's important as we, move ahead to recover and rebuild our economies. We need to take a step back and look at a historical perspective of how we take lessons from the past to help build the future. And I just want to allude to, 80 years ago, amidst, the severe attack of Britain's darkest hour, where Winston Churchill had a nation's address, words of encouragement in terms of not with a call to reconsider what is achievable, but a crisp pledge to never surrender. And I think it's important that as today we face this multiple crisis, it is not a moment to reconsider our development agendas, but a moment to have absolute clarity in continuing to fight for what the world and its people need. And I think it's because, not abandoning this common development agenda is due to the global turbulences that we face. And if we neglect it, it will only be neglecting the future generations to come. So to answer the question about, the multilateralism versus the minilateralism, I think it's important building resilience in Africa from lessons from the past. And going forward, it's still multilateralism remains essential in terms of establishing our regional value chains. I think it's important to also look at the regional industries and how what are the prerogatives, and to address the negotiations between Africa and its global partners. I think the Continental Free Trade Agreement is a very good example of this building resilience, and through political and policy cooperation that we face. I think harnessing the citizens of goodwill is very important, but the multilateralist approach is almost offering a certainty of finding global solutions for national problems. I see the minilateralist approach of finding regional solutions for regional problems. So I think the regional approach, we need a balance on that. We need a combination of the both multi and minilateral approach, so that it can be a mini is more targeted, more priority focused, and more country driven in terms of its people focus. So I think in essence that's what we need to have. And also the fact that the minilateral approach is more on the ground approach, where we have bilateral agreements with organizations and at country level, and a multilateral that needs to actually filter from what is happening at the minilateral level. So I would leave it as that, but overall this is what I think a good balance of the both is important.
Thank Thank you so much, Pamela. And I love how, I'm a historian by training and also a foresight expert, so I love how you showed us how we can look to the past to actually make us think more clearly about the future. And now, Davis, turning to you, Pamela has shown us how ideally in an ideal world, minilateral and multilateral formats build on each other and are a bridge. Well, a minilateral format would be a bridge to a more multilateral solution. I wonder, is that also in your experience the most effective way to address some of these challenges we're facing, or don't you also see that in practice always minilateral formats can also sometimes be in tension with a more multilateral solution, and that they kind of break down the conversation, the global conversation into regional silos? Is there not a risk that we're diluting the conversation?
Thank you. And I think building off what Pamela just mentioned about the complementarity between minilateral and multilateral approaches, one does have to take awareness or cognizance of the risk that minilateralism can easily replicate some of the problems that we see in the pursuit for multilateral solutions. So for example, there are problems or there are issues that are specific to particular regions, or for which the solutions can actually be found by strategic alignment between minilateral formations. But unfortunately, most of the global problems we face, and in my background, for example, in peace and conflict, it's not easy to sequester issues such as extremist violence groups, proliferation of small arms across borders, migration, or even, I think, the predominant topic of most international forums right now, which is climate change. It's not easy to sequester those problems. But it is more practical to address issues that are specific to regions. If landlocked countries, for example, are trying to deal with some of the root causes of political unrest or conflict or unemployment, they can enter into some of these minilateral strategic alliances that are more tailored towards their specific or peculiar problems. And to come back to the issue around whether minilateralism can actually derail the process, yes, if it does reproduce some of the power imbalances that we see as in the pursuit of multilateral approaches. And I can use very quickly as an example, if in peace and security or in Africa, the peak of multilateral interventions in conflict situations is actually peacekeeping interventions. And peacekeeping interventions are this huge and complex solution that requires both hard security and civilian approaches that are integrated to actually try and resolve conflict, or essentially get a sense of return to normalcy for the populations. But then to go beyond that, someone has to address the more underlying or the root cause of those conflicts. Minilateral solutions can work for addressing, as we mentioned, unemployment, for addressing, and I think I like that actually someone from the Cape Town conversation, someone mentioned the African Union imperative of silencing the guns and challenge us, to silence the hunger, silence the stomachs, and then we'll probably see, a magnified effect down the line in terms of silencing the guns. But at the same time, if minilateral solutions do not take into cognizance the reality that you can't sequester some of these problems, that you can't control, for example, climate change or extremism by boxing it down or narrowing it down to specific strategic interests, and that this might actually compromise the larger process of getting multilateral consensus, which is a very long, complex, and messy process, but one for which the more you delay, essentially, or the more you try and run away from that reality, the much harder it becomes down the line.
Thanks so much, Davis, and I think you've brought in a wonderful segue to my next follow-up question to Pamla by sort of stressing how not only minilateral and multilateral formats should work together, but also how international peace and security is linked, of course, to social and domestic issues, and how addressing some of those tensions will then feed to greater security as well. And Pamla, when we were talking earlier in preparing this conversation, you said that the most important solutions are always the human-focused solutions. So I wonder if you could just elaborate a little bit more on some of the success stories that you've seen, some lessons learned maybe on how these two formats can build together, and so that we've been talking quite on the sort of meta level of governance, that we have some really concrete examples.
Sure. Thank you. I think a combination of the both is very, very important to address the overall, how it contributes overall to the security issues of the continent. And security not just in the war and what we find, but in our food systems, in our unemployment, in our health, all that drives to the prosperity of our economies. And I think that we as the African Union Development Agency are able to demonstrate this in a way where we can call the projects and programs that we are implementing almost minilateral approach that feeds into the bigger arm of the policy organ of the African Union as a multilateral approach. We do that through concrete programs and projects that we have. We have, for example, just a land degradation project that is there to restore land, by 2030, 100 million hectares of land in terms of, and we work with the World Resource Institute, we work with the German Development Cooperation as well as the World Bank to make sure that, we are in line with realizing the development frameworks of the Agenda 2063. We have another program called the ASTI program, which is science, technology, and innovation indicators on how we collect data for development and how this data for development then informs policy. And going on to policy, I run a lead on a program called the Policy Bridge Tank, and that is basically bridging this policy gap, working with think tanks. And therefore, I find myself in the Cape Town conversations today, because working with think tanks is the knowledge providers and the knowledge, and this knowledge is filtered or bridged to the knowledge users, which is our think tanks and our member states. And we work with this to bridge the knowledge, but also using foresight analysis and bringing in a more people-centric approach as to how we inform our governments on evidence-based research. And we're trying to really increase that, because we know right now in Africa there is less than 1% focus on research, whereas in developed countries it's 3.3% of their GDP on research. So by reinforcing this, we think that we can, strengthen this minilateralism into the multilateralism, and therefore I feel that it complements one another.
Wonderful, thanks so much, Davis. In wrapping up, unfortunately, we're already almost out of time. You've worked a lot in the field as well. If you could give us a few examples from your experience, how the two can build on each other.
Yes, I think one particularly enlightening example I found in peace and conflict research is the issue of disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration of ex-combatants. While the background solution, as I've mentioned previously, is a multilateral intervention, a lot of the research actually points that if you're trying to reintegrate ex-combatants back into society, in post-conflict societies, programs that are focused more on the prevailing social conditions or the accepting community that these ex-combatants are coming back into are more likely to succeed than the ones that focus on the combatants themselves. And those social conditions can be addressed through minilateral approaches. So if it's a post-conflict context, for example, and the minilateral approaches are focused on addressing issues of unemployment, for example, if it's a partnership with either India or China to build skills or vocational training opportunities or to activate economic zones in particular countries, all very, very valid minilateral frameworks. They help address the underlying security issues. And this then flows into, I think as Pamla has mentioned, much more multilateral interventions or solutions, such as peacekeeping missions, mediation, or actually global level efforts to address issues such as violent extremism or the impact of climate change on vulnerable populations and conflict.
Thank you so much to you both. Thanks for giving us a sort of overview how ideally things should work, but also how they can work, which I think is so important. In many ways has been the underlying tone of the Cape Town conversations, is one of optimism amongst all the sort of bleak outlook that we do have, and to really keep focused, as you said, on like what's really essential to work towards in the future. Thanks to everybody.
And if I may,
being here.
just as a parting word, I started with the word of encouragement, and I think that often in our darkest hour we find our true potential. So I just think that we are going through a lot globally, and I think that through encouragement and determination we can persevere.
Well,
Thanks.
That is a wonderful closing word. Thank you so much to you both. Thanks to everybody. And goodbye from now from Cape Town.